The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elena G. Levine, and I'm president of Quantum Success Solutions and author of the book Networking for Nerds. I'm a professional speaker, a STEM career consultant, a longtime collaborator with AAS, and as pertinent to our conversation today, I am a freelance science writer. So I am especially excited and delighted to be here with you today to talk with an amazing all-star panel of truly established stars in their field who are going to talk to you about how you can be successful in a career in science communications. So our team, I'm going to formally introduce them in a few moments, but before I do, I wanted to give you a couple of announcements about AAS activities that I think you would be interested in. So first of all, wow, the winter meeting, it's coming up, yay! And it's going to be a virtual meeting. The 237th meeting of the American Astronomical Society will be virtual, and we're going to have a fantastic and really enriching career center experience there. I will be there, a lot of my colleagues will be there. We're gonna have an event about careers beyond the academy with panels and breakouts. We're gonna have confidential career consultations and mentoring where you can meet with a coach who will help you with whatever career issue you have at the forefront of your mind. We're going to be doing CV and resume collections, creating a bank and with job postings, and then I will also be hosting a series of career chats, hours that are specifically highly focused on unique topics to create a conversation with you to help you move forward and establish your unicorn career. We are also very excited that the AAS will be hosting one more webinar this year, Optimizing Your Time at a Virtual Meeting. I will be speaking on November 9th at 2 p.m., same bat time, same bat channel here. And we're going to talk about how you can be successful at the winter meeting since it's virtual. And quite frankly, we can pretty much assume that for the rest of 2021, almost all meetings will be virtual as well. So how can you leverage those virtual platforms to find people, to network, to promote yourself for the career opportunities that you want, to learn knowledge about the field? We're going to be talking about how you can leverage that. So join us for that webinar on that day. We are talking about science communications today, and in particular, we're focusing on science writing. And just so you know, we will be doing another panel in the future about science communication careers that focus on museum and outreach opportunities, and careers that are focused not just on writing, but on speaking, on being part of the community and interacting with the community face-to-face or Zoom-to-Zoom. That'll be happening in the future. Today, we're going to be focusing primarily on science writing, that as the focus of our science communication careers exploration. And I wanted to share with you a really, really interesting resource that you have at your disposal, supported by the AAS, and that is AstroBytes. This is an Astro PH Reader's Digest. This is a fantastic resource of lots of different articles and conversations about topics in astrophysics and astronomy. I think they touch on planetary sciences as well. And if you go to astrobytes.org, you can read all of their articles, but you can also learn about how you could potentially contribute to AstroBytes. And I know a lot of science communicators who got their start or writing for and contributing to AstroBytes. So I hope you will consider it. Okay, are you guys ready to start this panel? Why not? And I have a poll question for you as well. So while I put this poll up, I'm going to introduce our panel. So I've just launched the poll, and I just want to make sure, Diane, do you see the poll?
I do not see the poll. I still see the roster of speakers. There you go.
Okay, how about now?
Perfect.
Okay, so while people are answering this poll question, we want to know, where are you in your career? What stage of your career are you in? I want to take this moment to introduce our amazing, amazing team today. So I'd like to welcome Susanna Kohler. She's a PhD. She's also the editor of AAS Nova with the AAS. She's going to tell you about what that is. Welcome, Susanna. I'd like to welcome Stephanie J.H. Deppe, who is a PhD also in astrophysics. Susanna is a PhD in astronomy and astrophysics too. Stephanie is the editor-in-chief of ComSciConversation and a freelance science communicator. She's going to talk to you about ComSciCon, so stay tuned for that. Welcome, Stephanie. And I'd like to also welcome Lisa Grossman. She is an astronomy reporter for the internationally known magazine Science News. So please welcome Lisa. Thank you so much, Lisa. thank you, ladies, for being here. Before we migrate towards you guys telling us about your career journey, I just want to close the poll because this is very interesting. So, oops. Okay. So the results of the poll include that 70% of you are early career or early career members. So you are in your students or your postdocs. 14% of you are mid-career, 5 to 10 years beyond your highest degree or training experience, which is your postdoc, and 16% are established in your career, 10 plus years in your profession. So 70% early career. So this is very interesting to us because we're thinking how we could potentially help you to plan and strategize and develop a career that is enjoyable for you in science communications, pivoting from research, but utilizing your astronomy, astrophysics, and planetary science background as a fantastic platform to build a really joyous and exciting career in science communications. So with that, let me start with our conversation with our panel. Susanna, could you tell us a little bit about your career journey, how you got to where you are, please?
Absolutely, yeah, and welcome everyone. So my career journey, it's great to see so many people who are early in their career. That was definitely the point where I realized that I was interested in science communication. And so I started out in grad school for astronomy. I did my PhD studying the relativistic jets that are emitted from active galaxies. And along the way, I kind of realized that as much as I enjoyed the research, I really enjoyed sharing the research with other people. And that was what I was really passionate about. And so I kind of looked for ways to incorporate that into what I was doing. And I looked for career opportunities that might allow me to really focus on that. And it was definitely a journey. I tried a lot of things along the way. I did a lot of different outreach projects. I figured out what sorts of things I enjoyed, which ones I didn't. And from that, I kind of landed in this direction of focusing on science writing and really kind of being in tune with the direct communication with the scientist side. Like I get to see every day in my job the current research that's coming out and talk to the scientists still. But then I get to go turn around and share that with other people. So I started my job straight out of my PhD. I was fortunate enough to be hired by the American Astronomical Society right away. And that's kind of how I got there today. I'm happy to talk a little more about what steps were involved in that process. But for now, I will pass the buck along.
Fabulous, thank you. And I just want to make sure to the audience, you are welcome to give us questions throughout this entire session. You can throw them in the Q&A panel. And also you can comment at any point in the chat. And my colleague Diane Frendick is there. She works for the AAS. She's there to answer any technical questions you might have or any issues that might be coming up or any feedback that you have. Thank you, Susanna. Your career journey really resonates with me. It's not unlike others. So I'm interested to hear. Stephanie, tell us about your career journey and how you got to where you are, please.
Yeah, so Elena, I thought it was funny that you mentioned that Astrobytes is a career launching point for a lot of people because that is exactly the case for me. So going through graduate school, I went to the University of Michigan for physics, and I switched about halfway through my first year to focusing on planetary science. And while I was going through my degree, we had a big result that came out that was exciting, and it got a lot of press and led to some speaking opportunities. And that was really sort of my launching point headfirst into science communication. And that was really the point where I realized that I loved talking about and sharing the science more than I enjoyed actually doing the science. So that was a pretty pivotal point, I think, in my career. After that, I really started actively pursuing more science communication opportunities. But I didn't know at that point what I was interested in. I knew I enjoyed giving the public talks. So I enrolled in an intensive science communications workshop that focused on public speaking skills. I ended up joining the leadership of that organization after I finished the workshop. So then I became a science communications trainer, where I then helped researchers to communicate their own science more effectively. And then I applied and was accepted to be an author for Astrobites, whose applications are closing, I think is it this Friday?
I think that's right, yeah.
Okay, this Friday, they're closing this Friday. So if you're considering applying for Astrobites, definitely do. It totally changed my life. So I was an author for Astrobites for 2 years, and that helped me work on my writing skills. And now writing is a big part of what I enjoy doing. And I credit a lot of that to Astrobites. And then as I went farther along in my graduate career, I learned about this organization called ComSciCon, or the Communicating Science Conference. And Susanna is actually one of the founders of this conference. And I applied and was accepted to attend this amazing 2-day workshop all about science communication skills and connecting with other people, other graduate students who are interested in science communication. And so I attended this workshop and I started my own chapter, or I helped start a chapter of this workshop in Michigan. And now as my, I guess, job title says, I consider myself a freelancer at the moment, but one of the things that I do is I serve as the editor-in-chief for ComSciConversation, which is the blog site that I started through ComSciCon as a way for workshop attendees to get their work out into the world. So that is one of the things I do, and on the side, I do some science communication training consulting, I do some freelance writing, and that kind of thing. And I'm happy to talk more about any of these things.
So it's a diversified career that you've built for yourself.
I have found myself doing a little bit of everything, yes.
Fantastic. I think that that's an important thing to recognize, that when we build careers, no matter where we go, but in particular, since we're talking about science comm today, we might as well emphasize that a career in science comm is not, there's not one way to do it. There's not one path. There's not, when you're on a path, it doesn't mean that you can't do many different types of tasks, and diversify your skills and diversify your outputs and diversify the types of writing or the types of clients or the types of employers that you write for. It's very, very much dependent on what your interests are. But I think the diversification actually helps to solidify our potential as we advance in our career and gives us opportunity for networking and for expanding our reach. Lisa, I want to hear about your career and how you found your way to science news and to be the astronomy reporter. Wow.
Yeah, so I also studied astronomy in undergrad. I went to Cornell and worked on the Mars rovers. The Spirit and Opportunity rovers had just landed when I arrived as an undergrad. And I talked my way into a job processing the images as they came back from Mars, which I thought was total dream job, was going to be the most amazing thing in the world. And it turns out research is slow and boring. And I knew that, but I didn't really know it. And I found myself thinking, I'm looking at pictures of dirt all day long, and I thought this would be better. And I liked talking about my research more than I liked actually doing it, which I think is kind of a theme among people who end up in careers like this. And I started writing for the student newspaper, and that helped show me that I actually could write and enjoyed it and liked the reporting process also. And then I applied for PhDs in astronomy, didn't get in anywhere, and found that I was relieved that I didn't get in anywhere. So I was like, okay, that's data. And instead of going to grad school for astronomy, I went to the UC Santa Cruz graduate program in science communication, which in audiences like this, I don't say this everywhere, but I really consider it like a gravitational slingshot. Like I was on my way to Pluto, and the Santa Cruz program was looping around Jupiter to get there. It is not the only way to get there, but it definitely accelerated my trajectory. And every job I've had since then, I think I can connect back to a connection I made when I was a grad student at UC Santa Cruz. So those programs exist. If you are, if you're currently an undergrad, I would definitely consider it. If you're currently finishing up a PhD and you don't want more school, I understand. But there are PhD students who do go on and get there were people with PhDs in my class at Santa Cruz, and there always are every year. And Santa Cruz is great in particular because it's the only program that is aimed at recovering scientists to turn us into journalists. So everybody had a science background. Everybody had, it felt very like, oh, these are my people. Like it was a relief to find other people who felt the same way about liking to talk about their research more than I liked doing it. And I did a bunch of internships after that. I did an internship at New Scientist and then at Science News. And then I wrote for Wired for a little bit. And then I went back to New Scientist and I was there as a reporter and an editor for about 6 years. And then 3 years ago, I came back to Science News. So I sort of stayed, once I got to Pluto, I stayed pretty tight and I was one of the families of moons there. But that's been my path so far. And I think that might be everything I need to say right now.
Thank you, Lisa. You know, we just got a question about how do I plan for a career in science communications if I don't have a PhD, or if I'm in another career and I want to, like industry, and I want to move into science communications. And I think we just sort of clarified it for the audience. And I'm so glad this person asked this question, because here's Lisa, who did not get a PhD. I don't have a PhD, and all four of us are successful as science communicators in science writing in our own domains, in our own spaces. And so it's not necessary to get a PhD, but if you do, that's wonderful. If that's what brings you intellectual pleasure, if that's chocolate for your brain, that's great. But we all know, and ladies, just back me up here, we all know science writers, successful science communicators who not only do not have a PhD, but as somebody else just asked right now, do not have a degree in science, but work in science communications. Do any of you want to comment about that?
I think what's been said already, the real theme here is that there's no one way to get into science writing. There are so many different paths, and that's been so evident to me with everybody I've met. Everybody comes from a completely different background, completely different education, and that brings in, you know, this diversity of talents and skills to this pool that I think is really unique to science communication to some extent.
Absolutely. Yeah, when I think back to how I started my career, I graduated from the University of Arizona, my degrees in mathematics. I originally was in astronomy and physics, and then I was seduced by the dark side and got my degree in math, so shh, don't tell anyone. But I never really left the physics department, and I never left the physical sciences. Like, I did research in astrophysics, and I was president of the Society of Physics Students. And as a senior, I worked as the student assistant to the director of communications for the physics department. And just coincidentally, when I graduated, she left and I applied for her job. And that was really a turning point in my life, because I suddenly realized, wait a second, I love science, but just like our team today, I didn't want to be the one doing the science. I didn't want to do a science. I wanted to tell people why they should be doing a science and investing in science in some way. I was more interested in the writing and the speaking, like you guys, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I also want to add on just to say that you definitely don't need to have a degree in science. You don't have to have a PhD. In fact, that can really be an asset, because a lot of times as science writers, we're trying to distill these complicated topics down into, you know, a member of the general public, which is not a very well-defined audience, but you can essentially play the part of your audience. You have you're basically writing for yourself, because you are, you know, trying to distill that science down to someone who maybe doesn't know anything about it. So not having a degree in science can actually really be an asset.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree with that. I want to echo that a lot. I think one of the things that is important in being a journalist, or one of the reasons journalism is important, is that journalists are stand-ins for other people, for their readers. And so, like in like regular news journalism, the reporter is the person who can go to the courthouse and listen to the trial and tell you what happened, which that is open to the public, but not everyone has the time in the middle of the day to actually go. So the science journalist is someone who can read the table of contents of every journal as it comes out and pick out what is cool and interesting and new, and then tell you about it, where you is anybody. And I find that the stories that are sometimes the most fun and that come out the best are the ones where I have the least background, where, you know, when I write about Mars now, I'm like, okay, I know this stuff. And then I, you know, do my interviews and go to, you know, pick out good quotes. And I realize that I've been speaking in jargon with my sources the whole time, and I don't have any good quotes. I have to go back to them and pretend I don't know anything. So yes, it can be an asset to not be writing in your own field.
I want to ask you, ladies, what is the best part of your job? And related to that, could you give us an example of something that you worked on recently that really brought you a lot of joy? Who'd like to take it?
How recently is recently? Does it have to be in COVID?
The last 65 million years.
Okay.
Yeah. So at least when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. I think, since then. I think that's probably recent, geologically speaking.
I
Certainly
can start.
planetarily speaking, and certainly astrophysically speaking, that is super short. So we're talking very, very short time.
So I think what I really love about my job is that I get to have my hands in the new science as it's happening every day. Like, I love being able to interface with the scientists, and in particular, I love it when I get to highlight the work. So my job, I guess I haven't said this, is I write summaries of recent research that have been published in the AAS journals. And so I get recommendations from the editors of the journals. Sometimes I pick out my own. And then I write up these summaries, and I always contact the authors of the original study afterwards and say, hey, you know, I highlighted your work. And I love it when I get to bring attention to work that's been done by students, because there's so much enthusiasm for the research, I would say, before you get jaded in your career, right? And so it's really cool to be able to talk with people and like really get excited about the stuff that's been done. And that brings me a lot of joy.
Can I just echo that, Susanna? I mean, the thing that I love being a freelancer, I mostly write for Science Magazine and Science Careers these days, but in the past I've written for Scientific American and Smithsonian and Nature and many others. And I gotta say, it's such a joy. It's so much fun to be able to talk to scientists and engineers, to learn from them what is the cutting edge, to be able to be a part of it, to be able to be a part of communicating that, to be a part of the research enterprise without me doing the research. But I feel like I am playing an important role, but more importantly, I am having fun, and I do get to touch the science and learn about really amazing cutting edge science and scientists that I never would have had exposure to if I had stayed in research, because all I would be doing is my area of research. Ladies, Stephanie, Lisa, what are your thoughts? What's the best part of your job?
Do you want to go first, Stephanie?
Sure. I guess I will say, being a freelancer, the freelancer aspect of what I'm doing at the moment is being able to pursue what I'm interested in. So I am not currently tied to a boss that gives me projects that I don't want to work on. I'm only really working on stuff that I want to work on. So that is definitely a plus, and I think one of the things I am enjoying at the moment about being a freelancer. It is, I will say, difficult. Freelancing is not for everyone. I don't think it's for me long term. So I am actively searching for full-time, like a full-time stable position, just because there is a lot of uncertainty that comes with the freelancing lifestyle. But at the moment, I'm enjoying the freedom to pursue what I want to do.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I feel that way also about freelancing. That it takes a lot more skills and planning than when I worked full time in communications for the University of Arizona, and when I did other things. It really just, you really have to be very mindful of the business issues and the business skills and the business problems that you have to solve. But at the same time, and also, like you said, it allows us to be able to, you know, diversify and also work with people that are respectful of us and value what we have to say. I mean, I love the idea that one year I wrote an article about a forensic entomologist, and the same year I wrote about a physicist who worked for Campbell's Soup Company, and then I wrote about chemistry used in cosmetics. And I just love that ability. And you find that sort of difference and diversity too, Stephanie, is that correct? Lisa, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think my favorite thing is talking to scientists. And when I went from being an editor back to being a reporter, I think that was the main reason why, that I missed actually talking to scientists about their research. And that's really what fuels me and what gets me through the difficult parts about writing. The enthusiasm that, like Susanna was saying, people love talking about their science. And like, this is something I don't think I understood before I started doing it, but it's so easy to get scientists to talk about their own work, and they're so excited that people are interested. It's great. And I get to ask the stupidest questions, and I don't have to be embarrassed about it ever. And it's great.
And they're not stupid questions, because that's your job, is to make sure that
I'm standing for people who don't know. Yeah.
I love that too. I think that's great. Now, we had a really interesting complimentary question that just came in, complimentary to our conversation, meaning, but also I think complimentary to our conversation. Somebody asks us, what's the hardest part of your job? And I can start because, so as a freelancer, as Stephanie alluded to, you know, my part of my job every day is making sure I have clients. I need clients to help pay my bills, to help pay for my food and my rent and my very, very large cupcake budget. So part of my job is a lot of networking, it's a lot of marketing, and it's a lot of really investing in long-term relationships with people. I may not get an article commission from an editor that I start meeting and start talking with right today, but I'm building alliances so that in the future they think of me. So I think that that's one aspect of it that's challenging for me. I think another aspect that can be difficult is the time management. A friend of mine had worked as a freelancer for many years, and she left and she became a staff member. And I said, well, why did you switch? Why did you pivot back to being a staff member? And she said, well, I'll tell you what, as a freelancer, you have 30 bosses who want 100% of your attention 100% of the time. And she was done with it. I think she had done it for about 10 years and she was done with it. And it's true. There's no excuse that you can give to an editor. I'm late because I'm working on somebody else's article. They want your time. If they're paying for you for the piece, for the article, they expect that you will deliver on your expectations. So the time management, I think takes some time to get used to. Stephanie, Susanna, Lisa, what are your thoughts? What's the hardest part of your job?
For me, it's definitely the writing. The press officer of the AAS frequently says, and I'm sure he's not the first to say this, that he hates writing and loves having written. Yes, I think we all know that quote.
Yes, I agree with that thought.
Yeah, and so for me, the day-to-day, the thing that makes this most different to me compared to research is that I am constantly producing concrete things. Like I have created something at the end of every day that I can look at and point to and say, I did that. And that's huge. For me, that is so meaningful to be able to point to that and to have that feeling of progress that I didn't have when I was doing research, where it was all open-ended and you never really feel like you're progressing as much as you should. And it's just kind of, you don't get that satisfaction from having completed something. And now I get that every time I write a piece. I've completed it and I feel really good about it. But along the way, I feel a lot of pressure, like it's not good enough. I could be doing this better. Why am I such a slow writer? Oh my gosh. And so it's definitely like a daily struggle to figure out how to get my words in place in a way that I'm happy with, because I am a perfectionist and I'm constantly just nitpicking at it. But then it feels so good when it's done, and it's totally worth it.
That moment when you see the paper, like weeks ago when you saw an empty sheet of paper, and now when you see 1,000 words, 2,000 words, or even 300 words, it's like, oh my God, thank you goodness. Stephanie, what about you? What's your thought on this topic?
Yeah, I think I'll echo what you said about freelancing. It's just finding the work. And so I'm pretty new to the freelancing world. I will not claim by any means that this is full-time, like that I'm doing enough to make it a full-time thing. Like it's sort of just a patchwork thing at the moment that I hope I don't have to build it up. I'm actively searching for a full-time position, but at the moment I'm treating freelancing as an in-between thing to help keep me busy and to make a little bit of money. But that said, obviously, Elena, you know that freelancing is and can be a full-time career. Like it does not have to be a transitional thing. Like that can be your entire lifestyle, if that's what you choose. But for me, the hardest part is definitely finding the work.
And that you can also be a freelancer while you work full-time in another field, or work full-time as a science communicator for another organization, as long as there's not a conflict of interest between what you're writing about as a journalist or a writer and the organization that you represent. For many, many years, for over a decade, I was a freelancer on the side while I work full-time for the University of Arizona. And when I was laid off from my job in 2009 was when I really, really invested in my business and grew it, and have been completely freelance writing and speaking and career consulting since then. And it takes a lot of work to get work. It really does, especially in the pandemic. Lisa, what about you? Is there anything else that you'd like to share about the challenging, the most challenging and the hardest part of your job?
What Susanna was saying reminded me of a graph that I see passed around on Twitter every so often. It's how I feel about my story over time. And this is the best idea ever. Maybe this will happen. This is crap. I am crap. Maybe this will happen. This was the best idea ever. And I relate to that a lot. There's always the nadir in the middle of writing the piece where I'm like, why did I even think this was interesting? And I also struggle a lot with knowing how much to report and then struggling to structure what I have reported so I gather more information than I need, which is good, but then figuring out what to leave in and what to leave out. So the actual process of writing is hard. Time management is hard. Having enough time to chase all the ideas I have or pick which ideas I only do have time for. Even as a staffer with editors who can help guide me, the way that it's set up at Science News is kind of that the reporters they're subject experts. So my editors really don't know anything about astronomy and rely on me to tell them what's interesting, which is great because it means I get a lot of freedom to choose what I want to cover, and terrible because it means I have a lot of freedom to choose what I get to cover. I think for me, the hardest thing these days is that I have a 1-year-old, and that work-life balance thing is not a joke. That's like, and especially this year when she was at home learning to crawl while I was trying to get work done, that's a challenge.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the work life. We haven't talked about that. Did Stephanie, Susanna, did you want to comment on what you've noticed in your career about how you are able to create a work-life balance that works for you as a science communicator? Is there an advantage to being a science communicator versus being a researcher? Have you seen a difference in your work-life balance once you pivoted out of research? What are your thoughts?
Steph, you look like you have opinions.
Well, I mean, I think especially coming from graduate school where, I mean, by the nature of the degree, you have to put in a lot of hours as soon as I graduated. So as soon as I graduated, I took a fellowship opportunity with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS. It's their mass media fellowship, which essentially takes graduate students in STEM who are interested in pursuing science writing and matches them up with basically a news outlet, and they work as a science reporter for 10 weeks. And so I did that program immediately after I graduated. And that was 40 hours a week. Like I checked in at 9 or 10 a.m. and I went home at 5 or 6 p.m. and that was it, and I was done. And so it was quite the shift to realize that I had my evenings free to actually do things, which was nice. So yeah, I would say that probably it depends, I think, on what you're doing. I know a lot of journalists put in a lot of hours, and that's not necessarily like the 40-hour work week isn't necessarily the case for all science writers or all journalists. But at least going from a graduate degree where I, was prepping my PhD thesis, I was prepping my defense, and then to basically almost immediately go into a 40-hour-a-week job where I was done at 5 or 6 p.m. was quite the shock.
Yeah, I've as a freelancer, it's so challenging to create a work-life balance, to create very defined borders between the end of my day or my work experience and other things that I do. And I don't think it's just because I'm a freelancer. I think it's just the nature of being a writer. Would you guys agree with that too? Because I will get emails from editors saying, could you take a look at this? And even if it's like 9 o'clock at night, chances are I probably will take a look at it.
Or I'll feel bad if I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for me, I already kind of had the culture ingrained in me of graduate school and academia where they're it's very easy to not have a defined line between when you're working and when you're not. And that works for me. Like for me, you know, if I want to go out for a bike ride in the morning and then do my writing in the afternoon, evening, like I can do that. And it's great to have that flexibility. And that way I can write when I'm really kind of at my best. So in that respect, that's good. But I think it's important to sort of know that you can set up whatever schedule you want depending on what kind of science communication job you get, and you have to find the sort of schedule and the sort of definition between work and life that works for you. Absolutely. And you know, for me, it's nice that I work remotely and I have a lot of flexibility in that sense. Some science communication jobs, that's not the case. I also have the benefit of not being beholden to a news cycle, because I'm not covering the breaking news. I'm not covering, oh, we found, you know, signs of life on Venus. And so as a as a result, I don't have to run after deadlines in that same way, whereas there are other science communication jobs where you do. And that can be something that, you know, really works with what you personally like to do. Some people thrive under that sort of schedule. So it's really kind of just, you know, you find what works for you.
And just to clarify for the audience, so there's a lot of different types of science writing and science communications outputs that are done through writing. We are just sharing with you a few today. It happens that in my freelance business, I do a couple of them. I serve as a journalist. I very rarely do breaking news, so I don't have that like tied to the news cycle type of scenario. But I tend to also write a lot of profiles about scientists and focus on career issues for STEM educated professionals. I have written for private clients, so I've written for companies, for associations, for other types of organizations, universities. I've even written for alumni magazines. So that's just my portfolio, and I suspect that it will be diversified too. I just wanted to share that with the audience so that they understand that there's not, again, just like there's not one science communications career, there's not one type of science writing either. Very important to think about. We've been getting a lot of questions about how do I even get started? Like, what the heck do I do right now? I want a career in science communications. I want to be a science writer. What do I do? I have some thoughts, but I bet you guys have some thoughts. Who'd like to take this one?
I can start.
Please.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love this. This is a great question to be asking. There are a lot of different places you can start. The advice I was given when I first said, you know, I really kind of like science communication, now what, was start writing. Like, that is the best thing you can do as an initial point. I start a blog or start contributing to a different blog, contribute to Astrobytes, apply to write for Astrobytes, enroll in ComSciCon, apply to be a part of ComSciCon. So this is a science communication workshop for graduate students. Steph and I didn't have any formal background in science communication. Is that correct to say, Steph? Yeah, like, we're trained as scientists, but we did a lot of informal stuff through Astrobytes, through ComSciCon, and through just a lot of practice and getting your stuff out there, getting feedback on it, building up a portfolio. That's the best way, just to sort of dive in and get started.
It's the clips, right? It's building up the portfolio, having shown that you have written. It's the skill building of the writing, being able to actually communicate topics. And it's also the self-promotion, right? Because every time you write something, whether it's on a blog or in Scientific American, people are seeing you. They're getting a chance to see you. And I just want to give a spoiler alert, hashtag spoiler alert for the audience. In addition to Astrobytes, because a couple of people have been asking, like, where can I pitch my stuff? There are three in particular. I'm thinking of 3 magazines, and ladies, tell me if you can think of others, where you can, as an early career science writer, as an early career science person, a student, a postdoc, you can pitch an article that you could write about. So for example, in Science Careers, there's a column called Working Life. That is a column that solicits articles from the audience, from the community, just like you, to write about what it's like to study science, what your experience is in building your career. Nature Jobs is a similar type of scenario, and then the Nature Careers Network, and also Scientific American. Somebody asked about pitching to Scientific American. Well, their blogs network is open to you, it's open to me, it's open to everyone. So it really doesn't hurt to even just reach out and pitch to somebody, pitch to an editor an idea. I will tell you about how I pitched to an editor and how I really kicked my career into high gear in a moment. But I wanted to see, Lisa, you had a thought about this, please.
Yeah, what Susanna said, the best advice is to just start writing. Some other places you could do that include your student newspaper if you're still a student. Those are usually pretty accessible. And if you just go, or I can't like go to the newsroom right now, but email the editor-in-chief and say, hi, I'd like to write. Usually they are desperate for writers and they have inches to fill. So they want people to write and they don't care that you're new to it because they're students also. And I'm so glad Stephanie brought up the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship because that is great. That is another slingshot around Jupiter. A lot of people go through that. Our physics reporter went through that. And I also recommend the graduate programs if you're interested in something like that. I would be happy to talk to any of you offline about the Santa Cruz program and help you. I could introduce you to the director of that program. She's usually happy to talk to prospective students about whether it would be a good fit and just what the program does. So email me or tweet at me. My contact info is on the board.
Thank you. Stephanie, what about you? Did you have a thought about this topic?
Yeah, so echoing what the other two have said, just start writing. Like, don't wait for the perfect opportunity to start, just start. It doesn't matter if no one sees it at first, you have to start practicing. And then the second thing is I would say, start looking in your department or your school if you're still a student or at a university, because some departments might have a sort of news blog style site where they put out department news. You can contribute to that. I know when I was at the University of Michigan, our graduate school had a whole blog series about life as a graduate student and those kinds of things. You could look into if your university has something like that. And then the last thing I'll say is reach out to people. A lot of people are very happy to chat with you for half an hour just about what they did and how they got to where you are. So reach out to people, science writers. I'm sure the other two on this panel and even Elena would be very happy to talk with you about our career paths and give you advice. So we can be your first 4 people that you reach out to if you want, but start making those connections and start talking to people and learn how they got to where they are, and that might give you some ideas for your own career.
Thank you, Stephanie. The connections is so important. Networking is so important. And remember, networking is not me trying to get something from you. I'm not trying to trick you into giving me a job or a commission or an article. I'm trying to build a long-term win-win alliance with you where we're both providing value. And one of the most important conferences that I like to attend every year, and this year I attended it virtually, is the National Association of Science Writers, NASW. They have a conference this year. Their conference is called Science Writers. You can attend it not for free, but you can attend it online virtually. They have events throughout the year. When I left the University of Arizona in 2009, the very first thing that I did was I joined NASW. I don't know why I didn't think of doing it before, but I did. And the following year, in 2010, I went to my first NASW conference, and that led to the people that I interacted with at that meeting. There were editors who were looking to meet new writers, even early career writers. There were writers who were looking to meet editors to create those mutually beneficial alliances. That led to a commission. And then the next year, I went to another conference, and I sat down next to an editor of an Australian science magazine called Cosmos. And I pitched him an article just at that moment because I had an idea, and that led to several commissions with that magazine, with an Australian magazine on the other side of the world. The networking is so important, as is bravery on our part to reach out to editors and say, could I learn a little bit about what you're looking for? The longest commission that I have right now, I've been writing for Science Magazine in different divisions of that magazine for now 11 years. And that started with me, I believe, I cold called, and I don't suggest cold calling these days. You could cold email, but I cold called the editor of a particular division, the Science Careers division, and I said, I have an idea for an article. Could I talk to you? Or I spoke to him on the phone and I said, could I speak to you? And that led to 11 years of collaboration because I just picked up the phone and called him and I pitched him an idea. And that's what we have to do. We have to be brave about it. So NASW is a fantastic resource for you. And for those of you around the world, there are organizations in your region and in your nation that are similar to NASW in the United States. Although, to be clear, NASW is truly an international organization. That was one thing I wanted to share with you. And the other thing, just to echo the team, and to add to it, the idea of writing not just for your student newspaper, Lisa, thank you so much for saying that. It's such a great resource, but your local publications, they do not necessarily have people who have expertise in science or have a desire to write about science and the connection between science and society, and that could be a potential option for you as well. I want to ask the team.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes, please.
I forgot to mention there's a resource called the Open Notebook. It's a website and a blog network that is just full of excellent advice. They have articles about everything. They have profiles of working science writers, and a lot of stuff just like that answer the questions we're answering right now. How do I get started? What am I even doing? It's fantastic. So
yes. And we do.
I also want to shout out their pitch database. They have a collection of successful pitches, you know, things that were accepted by an editor that then turned into full pieces. So you can see what the elements of a successful pitch are.
Absolutely. So the Open Notebook is online. You can easily find that and Google it. And NASW itself also has a I believe, contracts database, if I recall correctly, and other resources like information about, like, I think Wordsworth is what it used to be called, where you could find out how much different editors in different magazines, I should say, pay for freelance publications. One point I just wanted to address, and this came in from a question, is for the people who are mid-career who want to shift into science communications. My thought is that the same rules apply, the same advice that we've been suggesting for early career members to shift into SciComms is the same. Do you guys have any, do you agree, do you disagree? Do you have anything to add to that for mid-career people?
I agree, and I wanted to mention, because I didn't say it, Astrobites, although it's graduate student authors in the regular rotation, there's also a guest post option, and we accept guest posts from, as far as I know, anyone. And so if you want to just like get your writing out in front of a broader audience, want to practice with this, guest posts that get sent in are then paired up. The author is paired up with one of the Astrobites editors, and you go through iterations. And so that's a really good way of getting feedback on your writing and getting your work out there. And that's for everyone.
I just want to do a shout to the audience, not a shout, a whisper, or maybe a light more. We're getting a lot of questions about other types of science communications careers in outreach, being a YouTuber, designing videos, doing podcasts. We're not addressing that today only because we don't have 1,000 hours. So we're only doing writing today, but we will be addressing that in a future panel with the AAS. So stay tuned. That'll take place in early 2021. So I appreciate all those questions that came in. I want to ask the team, is there a piece of advice that you wish you had before you started your education, before you knew that science communications was a thing where you could get paid to do it, that was a job? What do you wish you had known then? And I'll start, by the way. What I wish I had known was that somebody had advised me when I started as an undergraduate in physics and astronomy and then shifted to mathematics, that was a thing. Like, I wish somebody had said, this is an actual thing that you can do, and that you should start early by writing as much as you possibly can, and networking, talking to people who work in these fields so that you can better understand how you can position yourself for success. And looking for those types of fellowships like the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship and unrelated ones. What do you guys have to say about that? What's a piece of advice that you wish you had known back in the ancient days?
For me, I think it would be pointing out that as a graduate student, I was in a really good position to make use of resources at the university. There were writing courses I could have taken. There were, just a lot of things that I could have been doing in that time, where I just had a lot of freedom and flexibility to be able to pursue these things. And it didn't occur to me to do that until after I was no longer a graduate student. And I was like, oh, I wish I had thought to do something about this. Yeah.
There's a lot more resources in your institution and also in the science communication, science writing community worldwide than you could imagine. And it really just starts with Googling. And also, the other thing I do is when I speak to somebody, when I'm networking with let's say, an editor, I'm going to ask them, what conferences do you attend? What organizations are you a member of? What resources do you especially appreciate? I mean, I'm going to ask, if I'm networking with Lisa, I'm going to say, I'm going to ask Lisa the same questions that we are discussing today. Maybe I will actually do that later, Lisa. So what, Lisa, Stephanie, what about you? What piece of advice do you wish you had known?
I'm not sure if this is advice as much as just a sense of things, but there's a academia and science has its own culture and approach to doing things, and journalism also is, you know, steeped in tradition, has a very long-standing, well-established culture and way of doing things. And science journalism and science research are in collaboration in some ways, but they don't always have exactly the same goal. You know, we both want to express science, I guess, but a journalist doesn't necessarily want to promote science, and it's a subtle difference. And there are things that come up often in like in conversations with scientists now that I had to learn once, that like some university press offices send the final piece back to the scientists in order to get them to sign off on its accuracy before they publish it. Journalists don't. That's a cultural difference. There are reasons for it, and I could go into the reasons if you're curious, but I don't have to right now. Well, I guess it's an ethical thing. It's like you wouldn't send a politician the story to get his approval on it before you published it, because that seems like a more obvious conflict of interest. It's the same idea. It's just less obviously a problem with research. And like, so going from science to science journalism and remembering where my source is coming from now that I'm steeped in this other culture is something I sort of have to hold in my head all the time. And I didn't realize that was going to be such a challenge when I made the shift, and that it would be such a challenge to my identity, even that like I was a scientist for so much of my life, and now I'm like adjacent to science, but I'm not a scientist, and I'm not necessarily doing the same thing, or like we're not working on the same project together, even though we kind of are. I hope that made sense.
No, that's very helpful. And I think that's a great point to make about the difference between working as a journalist, where you are essentially a third party. You are beholden to your audience, to making sure that you share truthful, unbiased information about what it is that you're writing about. You are not beholden to the source. Whereas when I worked in public relations and external communications for the University of Arizona, when I wrote press releases, when I wrote for the university magazine, I was beholden to the university, which is why I would share my articles with my colleagues who were also employed by the university. It's a different ecosystem. And I think that's a very good point that you make. We don't always realize that. And I think also people who are beginning to either plan a career in SciComm or are planning to do a pivot into SciComm, they don't necessarily know that. So I'm glad you brought that up. Stephanie, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think one of the big pieces of advice I have is don't listen to your internal imposter. So we all have this imposter that tells us, oh, there are so many more people who are more experienced at this, that know what they're doing more than I do. Don't listen to that. Just follow your passions, explore what you're interested in. It took me a while to get over that, because I was like, well, okay, now I'm halfway through a research degree and I decided that I don't want to do research long term. But now there's all these other people who discovered this earlier than me and have way more experience, and they're way farther ahead than I am now. Don't listen to that. Just go for it. Yeah. Do the thing. Absolutely. I promise it'll pay off.
Don't tell the story the way you do.
Yes. Don't give into, I call it uncompetitiveness syndrome, where we think we're not competitive enough, so we don't go for that thing. We don't go for that job, or I'm afraid to talk to this editor because I'm only early. I've only written one piece, or I've written 0 pieces, but I'm really excited about that. Don't do that to yourself. And Stephanie or Susanna or Lisa, have you any of you written about imposter syndrome? I recently wrote a piece about it, but I'd like to share. So what is just tell us which publication you wrote so that people could Google it and find it for you. to read about yours?
I actually wrote a piece about this for Astrobytes. So if you go to my author profile on Astrobytes, there's I wrote a whole article on imposter syndrome and techniques and methods you can use to try to overcome that part of yourself.
Great, thank you. My recent article about imposter syndrome, also, you can Google it. It was in Science magazine, so you can take a look at that too. We're nearing the end, so I want to give the team one more opportunity to connect with you, the audience. And I'd like to ask if you could give us in about 2 minutes, or less, actually, we have 5 minutes left, so maybe 1.65 minutes. What is your final piece of advice? Can you give us a call to action? What can we do today to move our career forward? Who'd like to start?
I'll say.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Steph.
Oh, okay,
No,
I was just going to say, I would challenge your call to action today to be to reach out to that person that you admire, like that science writer that you admire. Reach out to them and see if they're open for an informational interview or, a 30-minute chat about how they got where they are and what they're doing.
Great tip. Do that. People listening, astronomers and astrophysicists around the universe listening to us right now, follow Stephanie's advice. Susanna, what advice should we follow from you?
That is totally my advice too. What I was going to say is that the thing that to me was so remarkable going through this realization that I wanted to do science communication and then learning more about it was gradually finding all of these people who felt like I did, and everybody having this moment of like, oh, I'm not alone. There's a whole community of you out here that all have the same experience. And there are so many different science communication jobs out there, and they all have so many different forms. And we only covered a tiny section of them today, but like legit, whatever your interests are, whatever things you're particularly passionate about, there's probably a science communication job out there that's exactly that. And it's for you, and you should go find it. And the best way to find it is to go talk to people, and they'll talk to people, and you'll find it.
And it might be that job doesn't even exist yet. You may have to create it yourself. I've created a lot of my jobs. My career is completely manufactured. And Lisa, what about you? What's some final piece of advice, a call to action for us?
Totally agree with reaching out to people and talking and have lots and lots of conversations. And then calling back to what Susanna said in an earlier question about just start writing. Make a plan for yourself to start writing. What kind of writing do you want to start doing? Are you going to start a WordPress blog, whatever? Like, figure out what you want to do as your first step for getting yourself writing regularly. Write once a week, write every day, but make it part of your existence right now, even before you get any sort of a job, even while you're in grad school. Just get it into your metabolism and get going.
Absolutely. And my metabolism could use some more writing. So I think I'm going to spend the rest of the day working on an article that was due tomorrow. Yeah, that's the ticket. Ladies, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure working with you. I want to thank Susanna and Lisa and Stephanie, our amazing science communication star panel. You guys were awesome. I want to thank the AAS. I want to thank Diane Frendick. And I also want to put a shout out to the AAS. It's a virtual meeting this time, y'all, the winter meeting. There will be a lot of topics discussing, there will be a lot of people talking about science communications at the AAS. So I hope you will come to that. And one more tip, when you go to virtual science conferences, ask if you can go and have access to the press room. I have made so many amazing contacts by just going to the press room, really extraordinary, transformative types of opportunities. So this concludes the formal part of the webinar. We didn't get to your question, I'm very sorry. We had so many great ones, but thank you so much for your interest, your participation, and I wish you all the best in your unicorn science communications careers. Thank you so much, everyone.